On that Tuesday, I thought we had actually negotiated an outcome. Instead, I got hit with a global gag order, which is ad infinitum, and it's global. And it led to a series of events that meant within 48 hours, everything was cancelled. My company was placed into receivership. And it was fast and it was rapid. Now, because we'd had so much publicity and because all media had been involved at all levels, it was brutal. So there was a perception that I had run away with people's money, which I hadn't. There was a perception that I was a con artist. It was headlines across every major news outlet across the world. My worst day of trolling was 1,100 messages direct to my inbox in one day, and they were brutal. And that was with us shutting down my social media.
Yeah, totally. And you can't make change from that. And I think at the end of the day, we do what we do, and it's risky, and we have to put ourselves out there every day, but we do what we do because we want to make a great impact, an impact on other people's lives, but also, let's be real, an impact on our life as well, and the people that are around us. And if we sit on that, then that is regret, it's ignorance, it's all sorts of things that most of us don't want to sign our name to. So it is about moving. For all of the people that are listening and nodding along and going, yeah, I understand this. There are those times where I felt like I was going to be cancelled. You've just talked about the fact that that's not necessarily the outcome, but sometimes it's going to be.
Yeah.
How can we, and this is such a big question, but how can we embrace this to be uncancelled? Welcome to today's episode of Influence by Design. I'm your host for today, Samantha Riley, and I've invited a very good friend of mine, Jacqueline Nagle, to join us, and we're going to have what I'm foreseeing is going to be a very deep conversation all around cancel culture. And I think that this is such an important conversation to have because there's so many entrepreneurs out there that are feeling this and maybe don't even understand what this feeling is and what it means. And even having the conversation with Jacqueline before this episode, it's opened my eyes to, I guess, some perspectives that I hadn't seen before in this way. So Jacqueline, welcome to the show.
I'm so thrilled to be here and have this conversation with you.
Now, this has been, I think I invited you onto my very first show. So we're probably talking about 800 episodes ago. I said, hey, come onto the show. So I'm so glad that we're finally doing this. And I think that the timing is so perfect. You're actually an amazing speaker coach. We're not talking about that today. If you want to hear about speaking, then definitely head on to Jacqueline's show, Speaker Driven Business. We're not going to talk about that today. Head over to her podcast if you want to hear about her speaking tips. But cancel culture. I mean, if someone knows cancel culture, it's you.
Yeah.
Obviously, we need to give a little bit of context to this. And I was saying to you before we started recording, there was something big that happened. I was on the sidelines as a friend. I knew there was stuff happening, but I actually didn't read any media. I never actually spoke to you about it. And I didn't because I felt like as a friend, I didn't need to do that. I just needed to be there for you for whenever we chatted. And you said, hey, well, let's start with that.
Yeah. And I think it's really important because what you've got to have in life is people around you who'll do exactly that. They shut out the noise. They're there for you. And they're willing to say whatever you need, whatever support, and they're not looking at the noise and they're not looking at the chatter and they're not looking at quite frankly, the BS that's going down. And I think, and the reason why I said, I think we need to start there is because number one, so many of us don't make sure we have those people around us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And number two, when stuff does go down, we forget to see them. We don't look up and around to see them. We get so involved in the frenzy that's happening in our world and the destruction that's happening in our world that we actually forget to look up and see that there are people just like you around. And I think I just felt like we needed to start there because especially when there's something bigger in the public arena, in the public domain, you feel as though everybody lives and breathes that and you forget that some people don't. right?
Mm.
And so, and the danger in that is because you feel like everyone's living and breathing it, you kind of let it become your identity. And you have to allow the cracks in from the people who know you and who are standing with you and are saying, I don't care what they're saying. I know who you are. And
Mm.
we don't have enough of that in the world. And I also think we need to think about who that is for us, but also who are we that for others? Like, who are the people in our world that we don't care what the world says? We've got their back.
Mm.
And it's so
Mm.
rare
Mm.
and we need it, especially in business.
100%. Because when we're in business, we need to play a big game, or the people that want to be successful in business, we need to play a big game. That big game involves a lot of, let's call them experiments, where things are
Yeah.
going to fail. They're not going to go right. You know, you and I both went to Stephen Bartlett. We both went to Brisbane. I actually met him in Adelaide. And one of the things is he said, if for every 10 things you try, one will work. That's a whole lot of failures that you need to get really used to coming out the other side of. The thing is that some of those are going to be little and some of them are
Yeah.
going to be really big.
I think if I can also add to that, like, especially as women in business, there's a lot of conversation, especially in the scale up zone, about VC funding, venture capital funding, and not going to women in the funding. And what's really interesting was that I actually have been in angel investor rooms where there's a whole room full of very big level angel investors and going through the pitches and things like that. And they expect 1 in 10 to make the money. They expect 2 to 3 out of 10 to break even, and they expect the rest that they'll lose their investment, right?
Wow.
That's a rate of failure that none of us think about, right? The sophisticated investors that sit around venture capital and angel investment tables, they know that 1 in 10 will be a superstar, 2 to 3 out of 10 will break even, and the rest will fail at some point.
Mm.
And we sit here as business owners and entrepreneurs and experts, and we go, we need 100% success rate.
Mm-hmm.
Yet even the people who are giving money to what they believe is a sure bet know that they have a 1 in 10 chance of this actually being something really, really special.
Mm.
So if you put that together with that perspective from Stephen Bartlett, then you've actually got to be willing to fail. And if you're not, then please go into the safety of a career. But even a career now, you've got to be
Mm.
willing to fail, right? You've
Right?
got to be willing to fail, right? Or else you can't get anywhere in this world. Also, failure may be as simple as what you were doing yesterday doesn't work today.
Yep. 100%. Things move so fast. So you someone that really goes all in. I've always known that ever since the day I met you. It's like, okay, so for everyone else that goes, let me think about that, Jacqueline's like, done it. your rate of action is like 0.01 seconds. Now, going back to one of the big project that we were talking about, to give context to this, I know that you can't speak a lot about it, but it was something big that you took on. Can you
Yeah.
just give us, for context, I guess, the outline of what happened here?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things. And so, one of the reasons why I don't speak much about it is I do have a global gag order on me, and I do have a company in receivership. So, we'll talk about the impacts of that as we go. So I made an idea. I was the CEO of a traffic control business, and I was exiting that because there'd been a change in infrastructure spending at a government level, quite complex. But we had to downsize the business to a GM operations and for me to exit. So I effectively oversaw a process that saw me redundant. In that period of time, my children were all in their mid to late teens. They were all in good places. I was okay. I was single. And I was like, what am I actually going to do when I grow up? As you know, I've done lots of big projects. I've run at lots of big things. I've done some great stuff. I've done some not so great, but it was like, what am I going to do when I grow up? And that question led to a series of conversations and decisions and contracts and a range of things. And we launched in early 2016. I wanted to launch a professional development business for women. So professional and personal development for women who in leadership and entrepreneurship. And I wanted to launch it with a bang. I wanted some noise. So I had really great partnerships and programs that were going to come behind our launch. And those programs were, we had opportunities with entrepreneurial boot camps with Marie Claire and Channel 7. We had state chambers of commerce were going to outsource their programs to us. So there was a lot of stuff that was already negotiated. But to launch with a bang, I wanted to launch with this roadshow conference series across Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne, big arena style conferences, and get as many women in as possible, and with another event in Auckland. And the headline act, the keynote speaker, and it wasn't going to be, and we've got it now even more like this cacophony, this run of like 20 speakers in one day, just giving you sound bites, giving you lots of things. You take lots of notes, you walk out of there and you kind of like overfull. So the whole idea was we would run actual facilitated workshops from stage where you would really go deep on something that you needed over the 2 days. And so, but the headline act, and I pitched her, I had to go through an agent, but I pitched her. The headline act was Reese Witherspoon. And she was to be our roundtable, VIP roundtable prior to the gala dinners, and then the keynote speaker at gala dinners. And per the contract, she was also going to do a Q&A. The person who was helping me with all of this was Max Markson, who's an agent in Sydney. He's the first person who brought out celebrity stars to Australia to do these sorts of events. The model is proven. So whilst it seemed high risk and crazy to everybody else, I knew that the model was proven. Except, and this is where I can't go into much detail, she and her team didn't deliver the core component of the contract. And what that means, so the methodology and the model for this is, and you would have seen it, A-list celebrities coming out to a country, they do a national media call, you see them everywhere as the events get announced on all the mainstream media, and it sells out your event. So based on that sort of exposure, we only needed a 0.01% conversion of inbound digital traffic to sell out all of our events across Australia. There were certain things that went down behind the scenes with that I can't speak about. And it ended up that on the 16th of, I think it was the 14th of June. Yes, it was Tuesday, the 14th of June. Someone pointed out to me the other day, my business name now is Any Given Tuesday. And they're like, of course, your gag order was on a Tuesday. I was like, pardon? On that Tuesday, I thought we had actually negotiated an outcome. Instead, I got hit with a global gag order, which is ad infinitum, and it's global. And it led to a series of events that meant within 48 hours, everything was cancelled. My company was placed into receivership. And it was fast and it was rapid. Now, because we'd had so much publicity and because all media had been involved at all levels, it was brutal. So there was a perception that I had run away with people's money, which I hadn't. There was a perception that I was a con artist. It was headlines across every major news outlet across the world. My worst day of trolling was 1,100 messages direct to my inbox in one day, and they were brutal. And that was with us shutting down my social media. At one stage, I had 73 pages on Google screaming my headlines, and none of them were true. My agent from Sydney, Max, put me into lockdown basically and fielded the calls. And it was hundreds of calls he took in the first 24 hours. And it was a brutal attack, and most of it not true. It was also interesting. I would watch people commentating on media articles or on social media about how I'd taken their money from their tickets and everything. And if anyone is in business, which most of this podcast is, you know that if services aren't delivered under a merchant agreement, that they get a refund. So I was like watching these comments, and in front of me, I had the receivers reports and all the merchant refunds that had been made, and knew that that person had got full refund within 24 hours of the announcements. So, but because I also couldn't speak about my receivership because of the deed that you sign with the Commonwealth, with the government, I also couldn't push back on those things. So it runs rampant. And even just last year, somebody tried to have a go at me again. So it was debilitating. I knew it was a big risk, and I knew that if it didn't go well, it wouldn't be great, but I had no idea how fast it would be. And I have to admit, Sam, I've always wondered about the backlash from the media because they were so involved all the way through, especially with what was happening behind the scenes. And in the last couple of weeks, I think I've landed on it. So when we actually first realized we were going to have to cancel the conferences, we put an announcement up that due to circumstances beyond my control, we were going to have to cancel some Patico conference series, and all tickets would be refunded. That was before the gag order. So 24 hours later, after we did that announcement on the website, the gag order was put in place, which meant that my insurance couldn't trigger because they couldn't compel, because the gag order was out of a California court, my insurers couldn't compel a true and accurate record of the lead-in. And therefore my insurance failed. So therefore, there was no money to pay to venues. There was no money to pay ticket holders. So the initial assessment from our insurers was, yeah, not a problem. You're insured for this. But when the gag order came down, it shrouded everything and they couldn't compel and they couldn't move fast enough. Now, if we were given 3 months, we probably could have moved fast enough, but we didn't have that time. And so it's been a really interesting scenario to watch. So literally for 8 years, I've had no control of the Google narrative. Now, when you go search my name now, you'll find a lot of the work that I've been doing the last few years, but some things still pop up. But I've had no control of the public narrative for 8 years. And the first 6 years of that, I had no control whatsoever. The media will also, if they can put Reese's name, my name, and a scandal or possible scandal together, they will do so. And when I've confronted and gone all the way to Asia Pacific legal level, it's literally been, we know it's unproven, we know it's probably not true, but sue us. So literally the combination, and the headline will have my name in it, but the photo for the click through will have Reese's photo. So it's literally clickbait. So for last 8 years, I've had no control of the narrative. And for the last 2 years, I'm starting to get that control back. So that's the context.
And when I hear that, like I was having trouble breathing through that. I've got like goosebumps. I can't imagine for a second what that would be like to go through that. And I sure hope that I don't ever have to either. I can tell you, I can't imagine what that was like. And it's been amazing watching you come out the other side in like the courageous way that you've come through. It probably doesn't feel courageous to you, but for me watching from the outside, I'm just like, wow, like there's some inspiration right there. I just wanted to say that. We're talking about cancel culture. That is cancel culture to the absolute, like that is the top of cancel culture.
It is.
There's a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs that are sitting in fear because they're afraid of being cancelled. You actually brought something or highlighted something before we were speaking that they're actually not afraid of being cancelled.
Correct.
Can you speak more to that?
Yeah,
because this
absolutely.
is gold.
Yeah, and this is actually what we're now going to lead with. So where this understanding's come from is, if I can just kind of walk people through why I'm going where I'm going, is I realized that I was starting to get control of my narrative back. And I thought, okay, so I can start to get visible again, right? And I pulled in a major strategist and she worked with me. And one of the things she said to me, she said, I don't know of anyone who's been through what you've been through who actually does come out and thrive in place. So her point was, a lot of people come out and pop up somewhere else, but I'm still in the city where it went down. I'm still an entrepreneur and I'm still doing work very similar to what I was doing, and have created great relationships. I've also, any trauma, high impact event, I've also made some really shitty decisions. This has not been a smooth rise, right? Like in the middle of mess, you make messy decisions and you allow messy people in. So in amongst all of that, she came up with a concept and we've just trademarked it and I'm really proud of it. It's called Uncancelled. And it was about almost like the antidote to cancel culture. And you can be cancelled and you can come out the other side and be uncancelled, right? And so to put it together, and Sam, you know my processes, I don't like people who are sound bites. I don't like people shooting from the hip. If you're going to speak on something, you need to know it. So I went down some rabbit holes and I went researching and all that sort of stuff. And all of the research I could find, whether it was university-based research in cancel culture, and that was the first thing that happened. There wasn't a lot of actual research on cancel culture, and yet we talk about it all the time on social, right? So it's like, hang on, what's going on here? And there was hardly anyone speaking on cancel culture unless they were people who'd been cancelled and still in the middle of it and quite rebellious, right? And I didn't want to speak that way. So I went and did a lot of research. I went and did a lot of reading. There's actually a really good book for anyone who wants to go further into this. There's a book by John Ronson called So You've Been Publicly Shamed. And that gave me a lot of leads into where I needed to go. And what I discovered was we're not afraid of being cancelled as such if we know we've done something wrong. We don't want to be caught out. Absolutely, we don't want to be caught out. But we're not, cancel culture is, being cancelled is not creating fear in and of itself. What is actually creating the fear is we're afraid of misjudgment. And what I mean by that is, but what if I do the right thing and I get called on it and I get misjudged for it? What if I say the right thing and I still get cancelled? So our fear is not being cancelled, even though that's how we label it. Our fear is I'm going to do the right thing and I'm still going to be misjudged. That's our fear, because that also leads to, and if I'm misjudged, I'll be excommunicated, I'll be disconnected, I'll be, removed from where I am. My safety anchors will go, my connections will suffer. And so it feeds into that really primal need that we have to belong, right? So the fear of misjudgment is so strong because we feel that the consequence is that we'll no longer belong, right?
Yeah.
And we'll lose what we've built. And I did lose what I built, right? And I've lost it before as well, which is a different conversation. But it's one of those things where you just go, I couldn't believe that I felt like it was too simple, but it's also so complex, right? So we do understand at a base level. We may rail and scream. And one of the things I say now to people is people are actually hijacking cancel culture. And people go, what? We mean how do you hijack cancel culture? And it's when people have done the wrong thing and are paying a consequence, but they want to somehow still get connection back in and not be completely railroaded out. And so they're claiming to have been cancelled. But if you've actually done the wrong thing, then that's a consequence, right? But if you actually have done the right thing all the way through, it's very different, right? So the thing that keeps us bound as entrepreneurs and experts and all of the people that sit in your audience, Sam, the thing that keeps us bound is this fear, right? But what gets really interesting is the little bit of research that is around on cancel culture. There's one of the universities, and I can't remember whether it's Penn State or Princeton, but it's one of those, has some research, and they've discovered that the fear of being cancelled compared to the rate of being cancelled is 31-1. So for every 31 people where that is an ever-present fear, only one person gets cancelled. And I bet if you apply this definition I've come up with about cancellation versus consequence, it's even less, right? Which means we're all not making decisions on whatever aspect of our life or our business based on a fear that is odds on not to happen. And because we have these few big hero stories, I mean, there was a clothing brand in the US, I can't remember, it was leather and jeans and everything, and it was kind of similar feel to Harley Davidson. It was huge in the US, and they got cancelled. This is 5 or 6 years ago through some social media inaction. We've seen it happen with people in their careers. We've seen it happen. So because we've got these great big stories of falls, and mine's one of them, right? Mine's up in the zeitgeist. We think that that is the normal, but it's actually not, right? So we have 1 in 30, which is what, 3 in 100. We have 97% of the population, if you extrapolate that as a generalization, 97% of the population are not making the decisions they need to make and having the conversations they need to have and being as visible as they could be and being as brilliant as they could be based on a fear that is not real. The fear is real, but the consequence is not. It's not true. Right?
And this feeling of being cancelled keeps so many amazing, smart people that are out there that can be making such a huge impact, and it keeps them silent. I know back in, and I've never spoken about this, back when the Black Lives Matter happened, I remember it was COVID, and I'd been invited to an online global forum to discuss global issues. Well, this broke out, I think, 2 days before the conference. And I remember at the time watching some really big names be cancelled at the time for the way that they had spoken about it. And I had this absolute dread and fear that I didn't 100% understand what it was, but I was also afraid of asking the questions so that I could understand what was going on, because I was afraid that someone would point the finger and say you're insensitive, or you don't care, or whatever it was that they were going to say. I didn't even know what they were going to say. So I was so fearful that I actually reached out to the organizer before and said, look, I want to know more about this, but how can this be brought up without me being the fall guy for the one that's actually asking the questions? Now, what ended up happening was, because I did do that, the conversation was brought up and it was given context.
Yeah.
And it turned into an amazing conversation. But I felt sick even trying to bring this conversation up.
And I don't want to take away from anyone the reality of how you feel. Like, and I felt that every day for 6 or 7 years getting out of bed, right? It's a reality. It's how we feel. The fear is real, but the consequences are not. And I guess one of the reasons why I want to start speaking into this is because I've stared it down and I'm through the other side, and I'm not fully through the other side. I've still got messes to clean up. I've still got shit I need to get clear. I've still, there's still legacy stuff, because when something hits you that hard, it takes you a long time to get out of the mess, right? And so you kind of compound the mess for a while. And I did that, like, I run at things. You said I run at things. I always do things on a big scale. Well, when I'm in mess, I do mess at a big scale as well, right?
Oh, right.
So I'm still, I don't want anyone listening to this and going, well, she hasn't cleaned this up and she hasn't. Well, no, I haven't. And I'm quite honest and open about that, right? But it's really important, because I see people every day in my work, people that I meet, people that I listen to, people that I'm inspired by, who pull themselves up from being everything they could be, or from making the difference they could, because they're afraid of what if. Well, I stared down my what if, right? And I remember when we first were going to go and pitch to Reese, Max Markson said to me, he said, you need to think about this, because your upside is brilliant. My method is proven, but if it fails, it fails, right? So he did tell me that. And he told me that I couldn't ring him back and say, yes, let's go ahead for 7 days, because he wanted me to go through the roller coaster of hell yes, hell no. Right. So it wasn't an unconsidered decision. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%.
And I think also that's the only reason why I've been able to keep moving through it is because I did consider every step of the way. We always knew what happened was the greatest risk. We just didn't think it would happen. Right. And so I want people to understand as well, like, you can have everything in place and do the right thing and it still goes to shit. And actually that's okay, because you're better off doing it. Like, I am a stronger communicator. I have so much more empathy now. And we have people coming into our world now because they go, hang on, you're thriving again. I want some of that. Right. So it's not a quick fix to come through it. And some people don't take as long as I do. Sometimes I think I am a slow learner. It's not a quick fix, but we need to have the conversation, because we've got to stop pulling ourselves up. Right. We've got to stop pulling ourselves up, because 90% of the world, or whatever it is, will pull themselves up rather than take the risk, because when they feel that feeling that you feel, Sam, right, they give into it. And what the worst part about that is, like, you talk about that led to a great conversation because you reached out to the organizers. So that led to a great place for you to be, right? Now, it may not lead to a great place. It might be something that leads you to a worse place. But great place or worse place is still actually better than sitting with your stomach churning.
Yeah.
Because if you sit with your stomach churning, it never goes away. If you to make a move and it gets better, it dulls, it goes away. If you make a move and it's worse, you actually break and you got somewhere to go from. But if you sit with that sick feeling in your stomach, you can't escape it. It becomes your address.
Yeah, totally. And you can't make change from that. And I think at the end of the day, we do what we do, and it's risky, and we have to put ourselves out there every day, but we do what we do because we want to make a great impact, an impact on other people's lives, but also, let's be real, an impact on our life as well, and the people that are around us. And if we sit on that, then that is regret, it's ignorance, it's all sorts of things that most of us don't want to sign our name to. So it is about moving. For all of the people that are listening and nodding along and going, yeah, I understand this. There are those times where I felt like I was going to be cancelled. You've just talked about the fact that that's not necessarily the outcome, but sometimes it's going to be.
Yeah.
How can we, and this is such a big question, but how can we embrace this to be uncancelled?
Yeah, there's a couple of things here, and I want to start actually with also acknowledging that, some of us have blockbuster cancelled stories, but it happens every
Mm-hmm.
day, right? A business partner goes off the reservation, right? And you lose everything. A marriage breaks down, a sister dies. Like every day something happens that gets people estranged from their families, estranged from
Mm-hmm.
their communities, like kicked out of the places they thought they were always going to be safe. So being cancelled or being disconnected and excommunicated happens every single day, right? And it doesn't have to be something that makes headlines. It can be something that just completely shifts your world and you feel like you've lost connection to who you are. So how do we do it? And the best way that I can talk about this. So even though that was a really big story, and the reason why I talk about being cancelled every day, I was cancelled pre social media form in 2004 when my 2IC took her own life. So she was my second in charge at a multi-million-dollar family-owned business, and I was the general manager. And through a series of events, and including bipolar collapse and a whole range of things, she ended up being successful in taking her own life in 2004. And I was publicly blamed at the wake for killing her. Now, people knew that that wasn't true and it was unfair, but no one knew what to do with it. So our
Mm.
multi-million-dollar business halved in 2 weeks, right? Our people, our team were horrified, terrified. I had to bring a full-time psychologist. It was horrific. And wherever we went, it's kind of like people walked away from us because they just didn't know what to do with this thing. So it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't I was being cancelled and disconnected because people thought that to be true. It was like they literally didn't know what to do with it. And it was so volatile. And her husband, it was so volatile, right? So all of a sudden we're in this black space where no one was reaching in and people kind of almost pushing us back into it. So I think about when you ask that question, like, how do we embrace it? Because that hurt really badly. It took me a long time to recover. I had to almost subvert my own grief process to be able to get my team through it, right? And my clients, because they'd all known her. So, how do you embrace it when you actually have been there before and you've got muscle memory that this hurts? Or you've never been there before and the thought of it is terrifying? There's a couple of things. Number one, know who you are if you never did this thing again. Know who you are in the quiet, right? Values, relationships, what matters, know who you are. And that's one of the reasons why I haven't walked away, because I actually know who I am, right? That's number one. You've got to actually do the personal work. And people think they're doing personal work all the time. I don't mean just talking to your girlfriends. I mean, go deep, get rid of your demons, understand your values, understand your true north, get really clear on that, know who you are. The second thing is know who your support crew are. And support crew is not a roster call of dozens. It's the 1 to 3 people that you can sit on the floor with and throw an axe at the door and hope that no one walks through it. It's those people you can
Mm.
trust implicitly with everything. And I mean everything. What was really upsetting for me with Simpatico was I thought I knew who those people were, but 2 of the 3 proved to not be those people. And that was
Mm.
also another really hard body hit because I let them
Mm-hmm.
in. I put them on this side of the door. The other thing is get good at shutting out the noise, right? So use social media and digital to market. Absolutely. You know that people think I'm all over it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't do that. My team does, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't Google myself. I don't respond to things. I don't whatever. And so it's shut out the noise, right? So it's
Mm.
literally know who you are, have your pit crew, shut the door to the rest of the world and shut out the noise.
Mm-hmm.
Get that strategy in place because it works every time, right?
Mm.
And the fear that you have that stops you from making these decisions is a mirror. And what I mean by that is if you have a fear of being cancelled or being misjudged, it's because it's actually not about the misjudgment and not about the cancellation. That almost sounds like an oxymoron. It's actually because you don't trust yourself enough to get yourself through this. So that's why I say you have to know yourself, because your self-trust is the only thing that will get you through. And self-trust breaks over and over again in these processes, right? But build self-trust, build resilience, build a knowing of who you are, because it's the self-trust is the reason that you don't do it, right? I now know I don't want to go through that ever again the last 8 years. Never again. I'm very careful about that. But I also now know that I can get through it. And I won't take as long next time if it were to happen, if I was crazy enough to do something like that again. So I have built up my levels of self-trust if that situation were ever to happen. So work on your self-trust, do that deep work, get rid of the imposter syndrome in your head, get rid of the inner critic, and know who you are. Because without self-trust, it will take you out, right? The fear, you will never make the decisions you should make because the fear will always be stronger than your own level of self-trust. And if the worst happens, and let's face it, as we said, one out like Steve Bartlett and the venture capitalists, you're going to have failure. If you live, you're going to have failure, right? So understand that when it happens, it's just part of the process. Yeah, I think, does that answer the question?
It really does. And just that piece that you said, when you're, and I'll put it in my words, this is not the words you use, but when you're wobbly, when things aren't great, because there are some days, and I'm not talking that I've been through anything big like that, but like you said, we've all been through stuff. And there are days where you're like, oh, I've got this, like it's behind me. And then the next day you'll wake up and you'll be like, oh, no, it's not. No, it's not. And it's those days where you don't trust yourself that definitely I have learned over the last few years, step away from social media. And like you, I've got my team looking after it. So I'm not saying I'm stepping away from it and not showing up there because it's so important to be visible. But personally, am I going to go and have a look to see what people have commented, or am I going to go and get into a debate online? Absolutely not.
Correct.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. And it's really important. Like one of the things you just said about, some days I wake up and it's not behind me, and that happens quite frequently for me. But the other thing that you said before that is actually where I want to go. You said, I don't have something on the scale of yours. And for the first 3 to 4, 5 years, because a lot of people knew, and wherever I went, it was kind of like, I remember someone engaged me for a speaking engagement once, and they're like, oh, and they gave me another call, and they're like, oh, we just need to have a conversation. We kind of feel like you need to put the elephant in the room, like, because people are going to be, if they connect the dots and they Google you, they're going to find the stuff. And I was like, my speech starts off with that because literally the elephant is in the room and you trip over it if I don't speak about it. So people were always saying like, it's not as big as yours. It's not as big as yours. It's not as big as yours. I wish I could really swear out loud. I don't give a flying that it's not as big as mine because it's all relative. So you might have a piece of news that to anyone else seems really minor and it knocks you on your feet. Right. And so I actually started almost coaching people to say, can you please stop comparing? Right. Like, yes, mine's very visible, but every day we have people have things that blow up their worlds. They're like literally something they might see out of the corner of their eye that completely destroys their version of the world. Right. And to the outside world, it seems like nothing, but it's completely destroyed their inner version of the world, how they see the world and how they think they belong in it. So yes, I have a blockbuster story, but that doesn't make it any bigger than someone who can't get out of bed in the morning because they had a fight with their best friend the night before.
It's wow. And you don't need to be the one to be coaching us over that as well.
No.
Like I almost was like, you're almost putting yourself in the position where it's like, no, I need to protect you from the big story. Like we all just need to just deal with our own stories. That's what I'm taking.
Just deal with our own stories. And, we talked before about, the people in your corner, and my world is getting a lot bigger. It's expanding again now, finally, because I'm not as fearful of letting people in. But one of the things that happened a couple of weeks ago, and I just want to touch on this while it's on my mind, is a new client onboarded. She's quite high profile, and a lot of people in her circle who know my backstory challenged her on why she was working with me on a private level. And she defended it really, really well, and she wasn't bothered by it. She was just like relaying it to me and going, oh, kind of curious this happened. Da, da, da. And I said, next time you get anything like that, and I now tell all my clients this, next time you get anything like that, just ask them if they have my number in their phone. And she got it immediately, because if you don't have my number in your phone, you do not know me enough to know my story and to comment on what went down. And I think also we need to actually start to call that. right? So
100%.
there is so many people who talk about us, and it's not just about, it can be in the schoolyard, like hands up, mums in business. How shitty is that experience being a school mum when you're in business and not a normal 9 to 5
Oh,
person, right?
right.
Like it can be anywhere, right? It can be gossip that happens in your community. It can be how you're treated in the schoolyard with your kids. It can be in a sporting team. And it's like literally like, if you are hearing something about someone else, just say, have you got their number in your phone? Because if they don't, and if they can't stand there in front of you and call them, they don't know you.
Mm,
They don't know you. So it's a really important thing that not only do we show up, but we give tools to the people who love us so that they can also call it out around us. It's really important.
that last piece, give the other people around us tools as well, because that is what happens. You know, people will say, oh, did you hear or did you know? Well, as I mentioned to you right at the beginning, I didn't know your story. Your number is in my phone. We do call each other. We do know each other. And when people said things, I was just like, it has nothing to do with me. Your friendship has everything to do with me. Your well-being has everything to do with me. Are you okay has everything to do with me. The details have nothing to do with me. And that, I think, is something that I want to not just be that person, but I am that person because I want also other people to do that back to me.
Yeah, it's like it goes back to the oldest premise in whether you believe in universal power or God or whatever it might be, but a higher power is like do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, so that's an ancient scripture writing, but it's so right and so powerful. And, and if we can actually start to create some of that, we also build our own strength. We also build our own, reservoirs of strength because if you're playing any sort of a game and we all say you need to play a bigger game and we want to play a bigger game and all that sort of stuff, but you know what, even if you want to play a small game, right, if you're just putting a foot on the field, right, you're gonna get hurt. It's a contact sport, so build your
Mm-hmm.
reservoirs, right? Build your reservoirs. So even if you just put your foot over the sideline on a footy field, you are still in the field of play. You are still going to get hurt. So if you want to play a big game, great. But if you're playing a small game and quite happy to play a small game, don't think that that's going to inoculate you, right? From two things, from things going wrong, but also from the fear of getting it wrong. Right. And it's the fear of getting it wrong. So the fear of, not the fear of getting it wrong, but the fear of getting it right and being misjudged anyway. Don't let that stop you, right? Do not let that stop you.
Mm. You have trademarked Uncancelled. This is something that you want to lean into. What does this movement look like going forward for you?
I actually really don't know. Okay.
Mm.
And that's the honest truth. I feel like I've pulled a thread and I've got no idea where it's going to pop, right? So, when you pull a thread on a tapestry or
Mm-hmm.
something, it just keeps sort of rippling and going, right? What I do know is that, and I used to speak on resilience and I'm a fabulous storyteller. And I feel like this is resilience on steroids. I feel as though if we can find ways to navigate the fear, that the need to be resilient will start to disappear, right? I'd like resilience to
Mm.
be a state of being rather than a destination that we need to get to. So I also think it's a conversation we need to have because you can stare down your worst day and survive it. One of my clients he was a paramedic on a rescue helicopter and did 4,000 missions. So quite often winched out of the bottom of the helicopter to rescue people and attend to people medically. And, he said, every day of my life, I was meeting someone on their worst day. Right. And so we are all going to have that. So I want the conversation to start so that we can actually, lean into fear. We can navigate fear and we can understand that even if the worst happens. So when I was in the midst of understanding that this thing was not going to plan with the Reese events, I met with Philip DeBella, and most people out of Australia probably won't know him, but he's one of Australia's more successful entrepreneurs. And I met with him and I said, I don't know what to do. I said, it feels like it's a freight train. I'm not sure where it's going to pull up. And this was just towards the end. And he said the most brilliant thing to me. He said, What's the worst that could happen? I said, company in receivership, huge publicity, personally bankrupt. I said, okay, great. I'm like, what? He said, those three things. Go home and make a plan for what you need to do if any of those things come true. He said, and then put it in the bottom of a drawer. He said, but plan for the worst and work for the best, right? And his whole point was, if I got it out of my head and into a plan, I could let it go and it could stop taking up space and creating fear, and I could actually make better decisions. And he was right. He was so right. And it also meant that when the worst happened, I actually already had a project plan for the receivership and the lockdown that I needed to do. Rather than trying to do it in the middle of chaos when I'm absolutely slaughtered and bleeding out on the ground, I literally pulled out a checklist that he made me create. Right. I moved my way through it. So there's a whole range of things there. But so it's an important conversation. But I think the reason why I want to do it is the other thing I'm finding in my research is a lot of these stories of recovery from being cancelled or having a high impact event that tears at your reputation is that there's very few examples where people are thriving in place. In Australia, Christina Holgate is one. You know, she got absolutely smashed with her role, and she's absolutely kicked ass in the same arena.
Well, good for her, I say. She should never have been cancelled.
Absolutely not. You know, that was insane. But it happens every day, right? And as you said, like even just watching some of the stuff around the Black Lives Matter, like it is really scary to be witness to. But what I'm finding is a lot of the things that are held up as recovery and making it through from cancellation more particularly is people are not thriving in place. So they're like removing themselves from where they were and they're popping up in a totally different character and a totally different occupation. And that's okay. And that's well and good if that's what you choose to do. But a lot of the time, my sense is it's because they can't figure out how to navigate where they were. Right. And I want you to believe that if the work matters or your position matters or your relationships matter, that you can make it through. You can, I think where, like, if you talk about like, where do we want to take people to? I want to take people to a place where they know they can stare down their worst day, stare down their worst event, and find a way to thrive in place. You don't have to blow up the rest of your world. Like when your world blows up in one zone, you don't need to make it a nuclear blast across the rest of it. Right? You can learn to thrive in place. I think that's what I want people to understand. It's inevitable. Something's going to hurt. It's inevitable. You're going to fail at something. It's inevitable that you might be misjudged, and it's inevitable that might make it into the social media and mainstream media zeitgeist. But just because there's a blast in one place doesn't mean you need to nuke the rest of it. And you can thrive in place. You can absolutely thrive in place. And I've done that. I feel like I'm thriving in place. As you know, I just got married. I've got great relationships. I've got great friendships. But I've still got messes to clean up because part of that thriving in place was I stayed in the mess too long, right? Because I thought I should. I thought I should. We're wired to feel guilt and penance, and we're wired to feel, so I felt like I had no right to rise again. I thought that my price was to carry the weight of this for the rest of my life. And for as long as I thought that, I stayed in mess. I made messy decisions. I let messy people in. I messed up with people that I love because I stayed in the mess because I thought it was my price to pay. And there was a day when I flicked a switch, and it literally was. I got to the office one morning. We'd had particularly bad run of media being reignited this a couple of years ago. And some of it was true, enough of it was true that I couldn't outright put it to bed. But it was hurting and all that sort of stuff. And I got to the office that morning and I looked at Martin, my husband, and I said, just today, I'm going to pretend that doesn't exist unless someone brings it to my attention. Just today. And everything changed from that day. It still was rough. It still hurts. I still muck up. But that's when it started to change. When I actually went, I'm just going to think about this differently. And there's a lot more behind that as well. But part of me staying in mess for so long was, one, it's hard to recover from, right? It's really hard to recover from. But the second thing is, it's because at a certain level, because I played a big game and I got crucified publicly, I thought I deserved to stay down.
Mm. That is so powerful. And for anyone that's listening, if it's like I am physically shaking, like just the emotion that's in that, not just to hear your story, but to also give the permission to ourselves to say we don't need to continue to live this. We don't need to continue to punish ourselves for whatever this thing is. And that's just so freaking amazing. I can't wait to see where this movement takes you. Jacqueline,
Thank
thanks so
you.
much for coming and sharing this story, and for sharing everything that you do. You're absolutely amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Samantha.